2 minutes over, it's time to start. Welcome to this webinar from Sperton and Master Management. This session will be recorded so everybody knows that. You will also get a notification on that when you came in. We're going to talk about myth in recruitment and see if we can pick down some myths and break them down, Steffen. So you have prepared a presentation for us. Just a bit about Sperton. We are a global recruitment firm with the departments in many countries around the world. We work in the different sectors, a lot in energy and IT, but also other areas. So really good to have a partnership with the Master Management, to do all our tests of the candidates. So this is a good and solid company that have done tests for a long time, and we are really happy to have to be able to use these tests and screen our candidates in an unbiased way and learn more about the candidates when we start. So over to you, Steffen.
Yep. Before I get started, I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation in a little bit. But of course, throughout, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to just put it in the chat, and Erik will monitor that and let me know. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the very end as well. So I think that should be okay. I am going to share a presentation with you guys and go through that. Let me just get like that. That's how I like my setup. Like Erik mentioned, I'm from a company named Master. I'm from their Norwegian branch called Master Management Norge, but Master is an international company. We started out in Denmark, actually, back in the 1980s. At the time, you had this person called Bjørn Mønster, who was a sales manager at Canon, who saw that some salespeople delivered better results than others. It's a pretty simple discovery, but he tried to figure out what it actually was that did that. He tried to find good tests back in the 80s. They didn't really have any, so he started creating his own, hired some psychologists and psychometricians to help him develop tests further. And over time, of course, we've got a excellent team in Denmark of psychologists, psychometricians, and also IT people who develop solutions to ensure that we test in a good way, and that we also have the technical solutions to make sure that that is done in as good a way as possible. My plan today is, first of all, I'll just mention a little bit more about Master. Then we'll talk about the recruitment myths that I think need some debunking. And then we'll do a quick Q&A afterwards, if there's time. All right? First of all, a little bit more about Master. Like I said, it's based in Denmark. That's where the head company is. But we have a presence, like you can see, throughout the world. And we are getting new partners quite frequently, we cooperate very well across the different borders as well. For myself, I come from a recruitment background. I've done recruitment in Asia, I've done in the Middle East, in Europe, but throughout my career, I always found it very interesting to think about what actually makes a good candidate. And what are objective ways to measure that? And that's where testing comes in. It's basically an objective way to measure a candidate. And in Master, we have 4 main tests that we work on. We have some other ones as well, and in different markets, you might actually see other ones. But in Norway, we focus on this test named Opto. Opto is basically a personality profile for recruitment based on the personality framework Big 5. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's basically the leading theory for how personality is, what personality is. And Opto then maps drivers for performance and job success, and it's been shown in some studies that we've done with some clients to improve results by as much as 200%. We have Core. which is a GMA test. And GMA is general mental ability. What is that? Well, it's basically the ability to handle complex problems. Studies show that measures of GMA is the best indicator for job success when you don't know anything more about the position. And CORE has been created to measure GMA as well as possible, independently of language skills or cultural background. And it allows you to accurately measure GMA in about 20 minutes. We have a test called Bright that does that is used for screening for customer service roles. When you have stores where they hire a lot of people who do very similar types of jobs, then Bright is a very good tool to use to figure out early on if you have the right types of candidates, instead of relying on maybe non-existent information when you choose who you're taking in for interviews. Bright is used throughout the world, from Mexico through Norway through Asia. It's based on the personality framework Big Five once again, and also what's known as ONET, which is a competency framework by the US Department of Labor. And last but not least, we've got a typology test called EASY, once again based on the Big Five personality framework, and that's used for team and individual development. I hope that sounds okay. I know this is not what you really came for. What you came for is the myths. And I'll dive into it. And the first myth, and this is a myth that I've fallen for myself at times actually, is the good old, I can recognize talent within 1 minute. Or even 30 seconds. I've heard people who say after 5 seconds of an interview, they can tell whether or not this is a good candidate. I'm sure some of you guys have experienced the same. And it is a very attractive thought, isn't it? There are a few things to remember here. First of all, it's the question of what do we mean when we say talent? Do we actually know what we're looking for? A lot of times we don't really. And then the impression we get within the first few minutes is actually based on other things. What happens is we get what's called a first impression bias, where we are fooled by things that aren't necessarily relevant. What happens is that we end up with either loving candidates, thinking this is a great candidate, for candidates who aren't actually good, or, and this is also a very common one, saying no to candidates who would actually be great for the position at hand. With a first impression bias, what happens is that we automatically go to these other biases. And now some of you might be sitting there thinking, but what do you mean when you say biases? Well, biases are these mental shortcuts that we take to make it easier to handle it when we don't really know what to do. It's basically a way to make decisions faster. But a lot of these biases, of course, lead us to take the wrong decision. Psychologists find new biases all the time. This is an overview of a lot of biases. You won't be able to read it. But basically, if you look at the corners, what we find is that biases are about handling too much information, not enough meaning, needing to act fast, and when we have to decide what we should remember. And all of this, of course, is something that happens when we are figuring out if we think a candidate is good for a position or not. And to avoid falling into these pitfalls where we end up maybe liking a candidate because they're like us, or we end up liking a candidate because they have other things about them that are good. This is called the halo effect. It's quite common. If a candidate is prettier, they might have a better chance of getting the job. It's important to really figure out what we're looking for. And this is where a good job analysis comes in, analyzing and figuring out what do we even want. When looking through the literature about this, one interesting thing that you might come up with is this study that was done for a casino. And this casino actually wanted to get employees who needed to give a good first impression. So they actually hired based on first impression very specifically. But that's a slightly separate thing. And they, of course, did it because it was based on the job analysis. So, yeah, it's a myth that you can recognize good talent within a minute, unless what you want is someone who should be recognized within a minute. The second myth we want to look at is this one. If a candidate's not motivated for the job, they won't be motivated in the job. What do I mean by that? Well, it's very normal for us to sit in an interview, and if we have a candidate who doesn't really seem like they want the job, they're sitting there like, then you think, are they really motivated for the job? And then you think they wouldn't be motivated in the job. Fact of the matter is, many candidates need to be induced to even apply. And they might even, when it comes to the interview phase, need to be sold as to why they should work for you. On the other hand, you might have people who are extremely motivated in an interview setting, but for the wrong reasons. And this is the question. I mean, what does motivated even mean in this setting? There are probably two types of motivation we see there. One is the motivation to do well in a job interview, and another one is in the job itself. So the question is how we measure it, how we talk about it. The study that I've listed under here by Woolley and Fishback, they talk about how in job interviews, both candidates and employers tend to dismiss the importance of what's called intrinsic motivation. In other words, what's interesting with the position itself. Why would you enjoy this position? What is it in this position that would gel with you as a person? And very often focus on extrinsic things, such as salary, promotion opportunities, etc. And the fact of the matter is, even though the research showed that both employers and candidates tended to focus on the extrinsic factors, they both looked down on the other for doing that. So a candidate who heard that didn't necessarily get the appreciation of why I should work in the position. And the candidate who talked about it might seem even a bit shallow for the employer. But the fact of the matter is, none of them actually go in and talk about the actual motivation for the job. And that's where the whole thing is. You need to figure out, is this a job that would actually motivate the candidate, help the candidate figure out why or why not, and then try to discover if the candidate would be motivated for the job. So with what I've just said, I mean, yeah, it might be that the candidate need to be sold on the job. We can go down that path a little bit and go down to a myth that I've definitely fallen for myself. I come from IT recruitment, and in IT recruitment, we very often had to look for passive candidates, and we ended up with this myth here. Passive candidates are better than active candidates. And for what I just said about the motivation, it might seem that this is what we mean. Yeah, you should look for the passive candidates. You should look for the ones you need to motivate for the position. And that's, of course, not what I mean. There's actually no support in the literature for the idea that passive candidates tend to be better. This is easy to understand if we remember that most jobs are filled with active candidates, and that most of these active candidates actually end up succeeding. But why then do we have this idea that that passive candidates might be better? And psychologists actually think the reason is because our brain need to identify, need to have justify the extra effort it takes to find a passive candidate, and thus they're better. It doesn't mean that you should not look for passive candidates. You definitely should, and a lot of times the best candidate might be passive. But what this myth is that they're always better, and that is not true. Active candidates might very easily be excellent for a position. I noticed that I've got the sun coming in right at the wrong angle, so hopefully that won't disturb you guys too much, but it's that day of year where it comes right through the curtains. But yeah. So we want to find out if a candidate is good, whether it's a passive candidate or an active candidate. Where we very often start is with a candidate's CV. Now, when I say a CV, I could mean LinkedIn. I could mean a CV that's been submitted by the candidate. A lot of ways a CV can come in. And the important part to remember here is the key word here is potential, because a CV definitely is able to give a curated look at what a candidate has done. And it can give a really good idea of what a candidate can do today. But it doesn't necessarily tell you that much about future potential. Now, future potential. Now we're talking, seeing as everything is the same with two candidates. We know that a candidate with a higher score on GMA test like core has a higher potential of succeeding and a higher potential of learning in a new position, given everything else is the same. But of course, with a CV, there might not be. If you want someone who's flying your plane tomorrow, you want them to be able to fly a plane. If you want someone to be able to fly a new plane in half a year, it's probably good that they're able to fly other planes today. So CVs are important, and they can give you inklings of potential, but that's not really what you see. And of course, our key reason for that is because a CV is written by the candidate themselves. So it's definitely a curated look, and definitely based on a candidate's ability to write a good CV and a candidate's ability to handle impression management. Research has shown very clearly that CVs can be, that people can be judged differently on CVs based on gender, based on culture, and in different countries. So CVs, even though we think it's an objective tool, a lot of times we end up being swayed by irrelevant aspects of the CV. What if someone writes in their CV that they're able to play the violin? Might not be relevant to the position, but it's difficult to not be swayed unless we know what we're looking for. So what do we use then? If we don't want to use a CV, of course, a written here GMA test is a good tool, but what a lot of people like to do is to have what's called a motivation letter or a cover letter, or just a free text section where you write about motivation. And that's the myth, isn't it? That you can deduce personality from a free text section about motivation. And the simple answer there is that research shows that this is a lot less reliable and valid than using tests. There is a correlation between ice cream sales and number of drownings. That sounds a little bit strange, but that's of course because on days where people drown, they also tend to eat more ice cream. But it's not a good way to measure the temperature in the sea to see, are there any ice creams sold? And in the same way, this is not a good way to measure it. It might have some correlation, but it's not a direct way to measure it. And a lot of times it will measure something different. You might think you're measuring a candidate's motivation or a candidate's personality, but you're actually measuring a candidate's ability to write a good motivational letter. This study that I've linked to is basically by Fan et al., where they looked at how well an AI chatbot could infer personality from a written sample. So from, for instance, a cover letter. And they found that, yeah, but no, it's not that. The tests are better at doing that. But AI throws another wrench into the wheels for this one, and that is the fact that candidates can also be using AI to answer these sections, and that's happened more and more, making motivational letters and free text sections oftentimes quite useless because people use AI to optimize their answers towards the position they're applying for. And then you're not really reading a person's personality, you're reading an AI's best answer. And that goes into another one, because when we hear that, we think that, yeah, but AI, humans would be the best at valuing candidates. And this is a myth that very often comes up, that only humans can screen candidates. You need to have humans in the loop. And full disclosure, I think you need to have humans in the loop. But when it comes to screening candidates, it might not be the best tool available. Because humans, I could struggle with screening if you get 50 or 100 candidates. Are you going to read all the CVs? Very often when our customers start using tests, they find it difficult to let go of this idea. They might have a two-layered screening where you still have humans who go through and do some of the screening. But as humans, we bring with us biases, we bring with us personal preferences, it is definitely good to use multiple tools. And where you want to do human screening, make sure you screen for the right things. And that means actually having a quite mechanical approach, meaning the humans should screen based on what's actually important for the position. And that's this source that I've got here. I've got another one. I think it was on the last one, or it might be on the next one, where I've got a study by Sackett et al., which is a very famous study where they looked at a lot of different tools used to evaluate candidates. And what we see there is that the important part is to use multiple tools. So not only relying on one tool. Does this seem okay? Any questions related to any of this? No. So with all I've been saying, I mean, you know that I love the idea of testing, of course. So then we have the question, does best practice recruitment mean using tests? You have to use tests to do the best practice recruitment. Well, if you remember way back at the start, when we talked about people who are able to tell immediately if a candidate is the right one for the position. Well, what I said there is they need to measure according to the right metrics. And the fact of the matter is, testing only measures some things. Not all processes require tests. It depends 100% on what you're looking for. This study here by Judge and Zapata, for instance, it looks at what positions could it be very important to look at personality for. So that means personality tests, and it means also, I mean, using personality in general as a selection criteria for hiring the right person. What they found was that there were two things that actually affect whether or not personality is important for recruitment or important for performance in a position. One is what they call situational strength. And what that means is if you have a position where you have very clear guidelines, very clear communication throughout the whole process, so very clear what you should do and how you should do it, well, then personality is less important. If we think of an airline pilot flying from Oslo to London, well, that's a position that is clearly has a high situational strength. They get clear communication as to when they're taking off, what altitude they should fly at, all of that. They also have checklists, of course, telling them exactly what to do and when to do it. Very high situational strength, also why it's a very safe thing to fly. And of course, I think you can all agree with me that if a plane from Oslo to London is delayed, it's probably not because the pilot is extroverted or introverted or open to new experiences. That's not the reason. There are other reasons. However, they also said there's one more thing that you have to consider when you see whether or not personality is important. Now, let's now say we are hiring for some pilots, and we see the situational strength, and we might think, personality is not that important. Well, Judge and Zapata also pointed out what they called trait activation. And what's trait activation? Well, that is, are you actually able to use these traits in a job, or what traits are actually activated in a job? And once again, with pilots, well, they do have to follow these checklists. They do have to listen to instructions. They do have to really be quite structured. And if you look at the Big Five framework, you have 5 areas of personality that research shows is present in all cultures. It's openness to new experiences, it's conscientiousness, it's extroversion, it's agreeableness, and it's neuroticism. And what I just mentioned with the pilots, that's very much conscientious traits. I mean, it's being able to follow the lists, it's being able to do all of this day out and day in. That's a main part of your job. Meaning, if you want to have a pilot who, yes, does well in job and enjoys the job over time, then they should probably be above average on conscientiousness. So yes, for that one, maybe you do find out that you want to use personality tests after all. But there will be other positions where you find out it's completely irrelevant. That could be simple positions. It could also be quite complex positions, but where other things are more important. I come from IT recruitment. Sometimes you have positions where it's purely based on them having certain skills coming in, and the position is so defined that, yeah, personality doesn't really come into the picture. Then maybe a personality test is not the most important part. However, you might have the exact same scenario, but this person is going to work as part of a team and stay in the position over time. And then once again, personality can come back and become an important part of the whole process. Does that seem okay to you guys? Which brings me to the last myth, and that is when we come to the end of a process. A recruitment ends when a candidate is hired. This is a quite normal one. I come from external agency recruitment myself, and very often we thought that even though we might have thought differently, I mean, a recruitment ended when a person signed, or it ended when a person, when the guarantee period was over. Then we were sort of done with that process. But of course, a recruitment does not strictly end when a candidate is hired. The results from a recruitment process can, of course, be used to improve onboarding for both the candidate and the managers, and used to work with future development of the candidates. It's also important to remember that candidates who went through a process, most of them will end up being rejected for the position. And if you end up being rejected, well, hopefully your experience was as good as possible. And then you should hopefully use tools that are proven to give better experience for the candidate. We talked about this human element before. Yes, candidates like having a human element, of course. They like feeling seen. But they also like, for instance, getting good reports with their tests or those kind of things. So remembering that recruitment is more than just that one single process of one person getting the job and then signing the paper is an important part. Does all of this sound okay? I quickly went through 9 myths in 30 minutes. Do anyone have any questions at the end of this talk?
Very good, Steffen.
Yeah.
We only got the question along the way if the presentation will be sent out afterwards.
Yes.
And we can do that.
I'll send that to you, and then you send it on to the people.
Yep. So any other questions, you can ask them in the chat, or we can I can open the mic if somebody wants to say something. Oh, I thought it was good, Steffen. It's interesting perspectives to go in, and I know that it's often a myth. You just you hear it, you don't think too much about it. But if you think about it and think on other sides, you can of course think yourself to new perspectives on it. But I think we often just listen to it and move on, don't bother to use too much time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear your thoughts and to connect it. So Fatima says, thank you for very interesting new insights on the myth. Very good, Fatima.
Thank you, Fatima.
So yeah, this webinar has been recorded as well. So it will be available as a recording, and we will share the presentation. Solfrid also think it's very interesting. Very good.
Thank you, Solfrid.
Thank you for the feedback, Solfrid. Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't have any questions directly, but Stephanie, somebody want to use tests for master?
Yeah, if they're interested in this, then please just get in touch with me. And then if you're not in Norway, I'll point you in the right direction with who you need to talk to. There are my contact details well, I can take them back on the screen again. And they're also, of course, available in the presentation that you will receive later.
And of course, Sperton is certified to do these tests, so we can help do it and do the feedback
of course, yeah.
as well. Fatima, yes, the recording will be shared. So you can view it back or share it with the colleagues if you want that. That's only a pleasure. Yes. So I think if there are no questions, I think we can round it up.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Steffen, for using of your time to share with Sperton's customers, potential customers, and some of our internal. That was really good. And we are really happy with our cooperation. So we will work together for a long time, Sperton and Master, I'm sure about that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everybody. I wish everybody a really good day.
Thank you.